Okay. Start about telling me what you remember about your mother and father.
Well, my daddy and mother were good people, and since there was 9 of us children and 8 that lived to get grown, and one little brother died when he was 2, but they were hard workers, and I look back now and think how wonderful it was that my daddy could make a living. He never went to school a day in his life. He never signed his name, but he could count cotton as fast as we could weigh it up and tell us when they'd get a bale ready. And we made a good living. We had cows, hogs, calves to kill in the fall. We killed about 4 big hogs every fall. We had 2 to 4 cows to milk every night. And we divided milk and butter with the neighbors who didn't have cows. And so when I look back now and think what a wonderful parents I had, and we had, all of us learned to work. And we were raised in the field, you might say, the cotton fields. Because I remember when I started to college, one of the girls told me, she said, "You walk just like an old plow hand." I said, "Well, I'm so glad I do, because I love to plow, but I never had plowed any." But
Your mother and father were both from the Sardis community? They grew up there?
My daddy was they moved from Banks County down to where Miss J.C. Norman lives now. I remember my granddaddy and grandmother. Grandmother was Granddaddy Milford's second wife. His first wife was a Shirley, and that's how we attend to the Shirleys. And they had Uncle Lee and Aunt Ida and Aunt Emma, 3 children. Then when she died, Granddaddy married Diane Dooley. And Grandma had one son, John Dooley, when she married. And then my daddy was the oldest of their children. And that's the reason he didn't go to school. He had to cut wood all winter to have enough of stove wood to last during the summer for him to cook on the wood stove. Everybody had wood stoves, remember, then.
Now, it was your father that moved from Banks County?
Mm-hmm.
But
my grandfather did.
Grandfather did,
yeah.
Okay.
But my daddy always lived there. And when he married, he was a hired hand to Uncle Bill Vassar. And his mother, my mother's mother, married in the morning, and my mother and daddy married in the same day in the afternoon. And they were married by Mr. Zach Peake, the Justice of Peace. And I remember Mr. Peake well, because we had to pass his house to go to hoe cotton. And he had 2 daughters, and they were our friends too.
And your mother was from the Sardis community? Grew up there?
Yes. Grandmother moved here from Alabama. And she was she went back to Alabama, though, later, and that's when she married, we called Grandpa Uncle Eddie. But he was really our step-grandfather, I guess you'd say.
And when were your parents married?
I have the date down, but I don't remember it.
Okay. Were they married at Sardis? Do you know that?
No, they were married at Mr. Bill Vassar's.
Okay.
And Ms. Vassar gave them a wedding supper. Now remember, he was a hired hand, and I don't know how much he made a day.
Your father was a hired hand?
Yeah, but not much. But then they moved out to themselves. And in our home place, Daddy bought a piece of land and cleared a strip of land and built 2 big rooms. And Lucille can remember when they moved there. I don't know how old I was then. I guess I was about a year old. But anyway, they lost the fire irons. We called them fire dogs to go in the fireplace. And she said she remembered Daddy giving her a rope and telling her to go back up the road and find it and drag it home, and she did. And then I can remember when our home place was added to at least 4 times, and we had a big 8-room house with a big kitchen added on to the back. It had a hall down the middle. And then in 1933, when electricity came, soon as we got electricity, I wanted her to have electricity, and Charles did too. And so we had their house wide and bought them a pump and put it in the well and had water run to the kitchen and to the wash place and out to the barns. And there's a good piece out to the barns, but we wanted water out there for the horses. And when it got the pump in, my daddy said it'd never work, said nobody can pump water out of the well like that. Well, Sister said he'd walk out there 2 or 3 times a day and turn the faucet to see if the water was still coming. He'd come back in the house and says, you know it's running. And he'd turn it on in the kitchen and says, I just can't believe that. But it was true. And then we wanted her to have electric churn. And so we bought her electric churn. And it was hard for her to give up the old dasher though, because she was used to it. But she learned with the electric churn and was so proud of it for a while. And then later we had a bathroom put in. But time we got the bathroom put in and the bathroom fixtures all fixed up, then the dam came along and they were going to have to move. And so Peyton bought the home place. Daddy gave him the home place. And they moved then up to Bethany community.
Now, do you know how many acres there were on the home place?
In the home place we had between 60 and 80 acres. Daddy bought 7 acres there. And then we bought the Vanderbilt home place, and there was about 30 acres in it. And then we had what we called the 7-acre field over next to Uncle George Vassar's at that time. And that was mine. He gave me that. I bought it from him when they needed money. I can go back and tell you when we had a drought in 24 and 25, and nobody made anything. And that was when I was in college. And I had a letter from Lucille telling me that Daddy was going to sell the place. And so the lady I was boarding with told me to write and ask her if Daddy had any insurance. And if he did, we could borrow it on the insurance. And so I wrote that night and mailed Lucille a letter. And so she read it to Daddy, and he had taken out insurance way back years before, and he had a disability. But he had a stroke when I was in the 9th grade and wasn't able to work anymore. It hit him on his right side and his right arm and hand. And Lucille even had to help dress him because he couldn't dress himself. And when he went back, he drew enough money to pay for the fertilizer for the 2 years he owed, and then some to help on that year. So that saved our home place.
Now his whole life he earned his living from farming that land.
From farming. There wasn't anything except, and we didn't charge very much. A mother would go to town twice a year and buy our clothes. She'd go in the spring, and I don't know how she did it, but she'd buy our Sunday shoes and Sunday clothes. And we didn't have many clothes like you have now. We had plenty to wear to church though. And then in the fall, she'd go and buy our winter clothes, shoes and all, and coats, heavy coats. And we didn't know what raincoats and galoshes and all was back then, but we just accepted the weather as it was.
Now they went to Hartwell by buggy when she did that? Went to Hartwell by wagon or buggy when she did that?
We went to Hartwell in the buggy. Dad, I can remember when Daddy bought a new buggy, and we were so proud of it. But we wasn't near as proud as when he bought the first Ford. He bought a Ford when Joel was old enough to drive, and Joel assured him that he'd learn to drive.
Was Joel the oldest?
Lucille was the oldest, and then Joel.
Okay.
And Mother and Daddy went in the buggy to see somebody that was sick on Sunday afternoon. And Joel said, let's all go a ride. So we got in that car, and it was snowing. And we didn't have sense enough to know that we'd leave tracks. We thought we wouldn't tell anybody. Well, we went down to what was called Craft's Ferry then, and made a circle, and started back up the hill and got stuck. We all got out, and we pushed that car up the hill just like it was a feather. And we got back home, and then we couldn't cover up our tracks. And when Daddy got there, we had to admit that we'd been a ride. But Joel enjoyed that car because it had lights on it. And when we'd go to church on Sunday night, he'd drive real slow coming home and throw the lights in every buggy to see what they were doing in the buggies that we'd pass.
One horse or two horse buggy?
We had a one horse. We had a one horse wagon and a two horse wagon and a buggy.
Who took care of the horses?
The boys. And my daddy made sure they were fed. They were all fed. And at that time I was dating, and when my date would come, the horse wasn't as fat as Daddy's, and he'd always go out there and feed it, as if that would help a lot.
Did you heat the house with wood, or did you have?
We had two fireplaces, one in the living room and one in what we call the parlor. And we used wood. And our porch went yellow all the way around the house. And we'd have enough of firewood packed up on the porch around the backside for the living room, so we could raise the window and put it in, or we could go in and out the kitchen door. And we always had the house warm. But now we didn't have electric blankets, and we didn't have a bathroom when I grew up. We bathed in a tin tub, and our kitchen stove was had four or six big eyes and a big water tank on the side. And in that water tank, it used the most water. We had to keep it full, because we used lots then, not only to bathe, but to wash dishes and to clean up with. And then our stove had a big warmer across the top, and we could keep food warm there. And my mother was a good cook.
Now, but you did use a bed warmer from time to time, didn't you? Heat something up in the fireplace and wrap it up?
Yeah, we would heat an iron and wrap it up if we wanted to, but usually we'd get good and warm and run to bed. And,
tell me about Christmases back then in that house.
When I look back on Christmas, I remember one Christmas, Santa Claus brought me a dresser for my doll clothes, and brought Lucille a dressing table and dolls to go with it. And we always had apples and oranges, and we called them niggertoes, nuts and raisins and stick candy, lots of it. And Santa Claus had unwrapped his gifts out on the front porch one night, and Joel found it the next morning. And he found a whole box of candy that hadn't been touched, and he claimed it. But Mother made him divide with the rest of us. And I remember one Christmas he got an air rifle. It had snowed that Christmas. And we were all sitting in there, and he took his rifle and he was going to the barn. Well, the old hens was up in the tree, and one old hen flew out of the tree when she saw him coming out. And he raised up his air rifle and took aim, and down fell the hen. He ran and grabbed it and started running to the barn. Mother raised the window and called him to bring that hen back. So he turned around. It took him a long time to get in the house with that hen, because he thought it was the wrong thing to kill the hen. But anyway, we enjoyed chicken. Mother would always cook. She'd fill the pie shelves full of custards and pies and cakes for Christmas. And Daddy would always divide. I remember one Christmas we had a colored family living, Uncle Mose they called him. And Daddy says, I want to take Uncle Mose. So he cut a ham half in two and carried him some ham, and Mother divided the cake and pies and carried over there with him because they didn't have anything except just enough to live on. They were hired hands. And I didn't know that we were poor. I always thought we were rich. But when I was in college, when the teacher would ask lots of times, nobody to speak up, I'd speak up and tell her something. She asked one day about the value of syrup. And I told her that we raised syrup. And I told her we had syrup cane, a whole bottom full of it. And I told her about the when the man that made syrup would move in the fall, and we would strip that cane down to the bottom and cut it off and cut the tops off and tote it up and pile it up in piles. And they had a mule hitched to the grinder, and the mule would go round and round and grind that up, and the man would cook syrup. And when late in the afternoons, then when night was coming on, and he had put the syrup in cans and would have so much left in the vat, Mother would bring a big flour sack full of hot baked rolls. She'd butter them while they were hot and bring them down there, and we would sop out those vats with that hot rolls and plenty to drink, and it was delicious. And then he'd wash the vat and have it ready for the next day. And we put our syrup in big barrels and kept the barrels in the barn. And I can remember going out there and holding the bowl for Mother, and she would take a saucer, and one barrel went to sugar, and she'd dip that syrup out with a big saucer and fill a great big bowl full, and she'd cook syrup cookies and syrup cakes. And we enjoyed taking that to school too. And we had enough to do all winter. And then we kept our canned fruit in the cotton seeds in the same barn. And Daddy had what he called the planting seeds, and nobody was allowed on the planting seeds, but on the other side of the barn was the cotton seed we could feed to the cows and calves and other things. But we'd go out there and dig a hole, and when cold weather was coming, and bury our canned fruit, because back then the weather was so cold it had popped the cans in the house. And that's the way we kept our canned stuff. I can remember blackberries. We used to have so many blackberries, it wouldn't take but just an hour or two, you'd have two gallons or more blackberries just to go a little piece from the house. But now you can't hardly find a vine.
Now the house set up kind of on a plateau and ran down to a creek down there, and as I remember it, the garden was halfway between the house and the creek.
Yeah.
Down there.
We had a big garden, and we had a trough run from the creek to the top of the garden, and when they needed water, we'd go down there and stop that creek up, and that water would run up that trough and run out in spigots and water the whole garden. And when the man came around taking pictures for the dam, he said that's the prettiest sight he had ever seen. The water was frozen over down there, and there was icicles, long icicles hanging all around the trough. And we had strawberries down there too. It wouldn't take very long to pick a gallon of strawberries in the spring.
And you weren't very far from the Savannah River either.
No. We could walk the Savannah River. My brothers walked all the time. They loved to fish down there. And that's one thing, they'd work hard all the week, get to quit at dinner time and go fishing.
Quit at dinner
Daddy
time
always told me, now you have to be home in time to go to church. And so I remember one Sunday morning, they were kind of late coming in. Daddy done walked the floor, walked to the barn back and barn back. Said, those boys better hurry up. Then we saw them coming, and they came in, and they pretended they were too tired to go to church. But when Daddy told them get their clothes on in a hurry, they got them on, and they couldn't find the caps. Daddy said, go bareheaded. Back then, everybody wore caps, but they found the caps. They knew where they were, and off to church they went. They had company one time, and he didn't want to go. And claimed he was too tired, and Daddy said, you have to go anyway if you're here with the boys. So they go feed the mules first, so they went out there, and a big rat run up his breeches leg. And boy, he wasn't tired anymore. He came flying back in the house and told us about it, and we all laughed. But they all went on to church, and Lucille always had dinner ready when they got back.
The syrup that you made, was it just for your use, or did you sell any of it? Did you sell any of the syrup, or was it all just for your use?
We gave some away a lot of times, but we didn't sell anything. I can't remember ever selling anything unless somebody would come and want to buy some eggs. And my mother would give them eggs, I would sell them eggs.
Now, you were going to church at Sardis?
Mm-hmm.
Was it where it is now?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were in the old church, in the first church. It was, the Sardis first church was just one big room with two little supply rooms on the side. And in the back was two big rooms and a dressing room, one for the boys and one for the girls when they were baptized. And the Sardis old church had a pulpit, I guess you'd say. And but now that old church was replaced by the new second church, and now they have the third church. And the second church is a huge church, but it was needing lots of repair, and they needed more rooms, so they built this other one. And one reason they built it, when they did, we had one of my cousins, Arthur Heaton, died, and he left $50,000 for Sardis Church. And so they used part of that money for a bus, and they still using that bus, and put the other on. And Sardis community is a cooperative community. Everybody pitches in and helps.
Where did you go to school in the early years?
You don't start to school. I guess I was about 7 when I started. I tell you had to be old enough to run to keep up with the oldest ones, because we all ran to school back then. And I can remember when I was in the first grade, because Lucille could run, and Joel could outrun all of us. And Lucille would try to take care of me. And when I started, the Sardis had 2 rooms. We call them big room and little room. And 5 of us sat together in the little room. And I remember my teacher was Miss Floyd Massey. But what I remember most is 2 of the big boys, Asbury Parks and Clifford Hill. They were in the 6th grade, 5th grade, as high as they went. And in the 6th, they went through the 6th, I think. And they'd come out there and meet me every morning and pick me up and put me on their back and piggyback, ride me to the house. And every recess, they'd race around there and play with and pick me up and swing me from one to the other. And they always curled my hair, because my hair was hanging down in curls. And they'd always run their fingers through my hair. And I remember the first Easter egg hunt. I found a candy egg, and I never had seen a candy egg. Didn't know they made them. And Lucille came to me and said, don't eat that, because it might be poison. And I didn't. And then somebody came along and told us they were candy eggs. And she told me to be careful, though, because she's afraid I'd get poison. So, but she always tried to take care of me. And
where was the school in relation to where the house is and where the church is?
the school today, if you were going down by Sardis Church, the school sat right where right on the road. You go right down the hill to the spring. Now the spring has been covered up. We had a wonderful spring, and we did love to go down there, and we had a big hill on top. And I remember those boys would take a 5-gallon can and go up and pour out water and get it real slippy. And then they'd put us on that sled, and down the hill we'd go. And we'd go right up to the spring and prop our feet against the brick wall, keep them going in it. Today, if we was to see that going on, we'd think we was crazy. But that's what we enjoyed. And we played that every recess when we could. We enjoyed it.
Did you just take a sack lunch to school? Did you just take a sack lunch to school?
We carried our lunch to school. Lucille would always tote the basket. We'd take it all together. And the boys, they'd wrap theirs up and I'll come and get it and run off and eat with the other boys. They couldn't eat much for playing, but I remember one time we didn't have any lunch. We always leave it out in the cloakroom where you'd leave your coats and lunches, and a dog had come in and got his head hung onto our basket and carried our dinner off. But later, several weeks after that, our basket was found in the woods, and that's how we know that a dog had carried it off. But we always had good lunches because we had, my mother would parch peanuts on Friday night. That's one time that we all knew what we had to do. We'd shell peanuts and husk them and run them through the sausage mill, and she would melt butter enough to run in it and pad it up in square blocks. I'll put it in the butter mold and mold it, and we bought soda crackers then about 25 pounds, and the soda crackers came in a beautiful chest, and we'd all want, every one of us would want that chest when we finish up with the crackers. But we could slice that peanut butter and make peanut butter sandwiches, and we had that, and we had sausage and biscuits, and then we would butter biscuits while it's hot and put brown sugar in it, and we had any kind of the hog meat that we wanted to take. So I look back now and see what a good meal we had and didn't know it.
Now tell me about going to high school.
Well, when I finished the 6th grade, I wanted to go to school. And my home demonstration agent wanted me to go to school. But Daddy said no, he needed me in the field. But Mother said yes. Said, if you want to go to school, you go. And she had talked it over with Daddy. And they agreed that I could go to school starting in September. But when I'd have to work all day on Saturday when the rest of them would quit at dinner time. And so I was glad to do that. And when I started in Hartwell, I took the test, and they put me in the 8th grade. I skipped the 7th. And I thought I would be in the 7th. And Mr. Allman was our principal, and he said, no, I wished I had some more like you. And so I walked to the highway and would ride with Cofer Turner, one of our neighbors. And sometimes he would be gone on. I just walked on to school. And I walked home nearly every afternoon. It's about a little over 5 miles, I guess, from Hartwell down there. And it wasn't no trouble to walk, because there were others walking too. And sometimes somebody come along in a wagon, and we'd crawl in the back of the wagon and ride. And when it was pouring down rain, my brother-in-law would take me in the buggy, and we'd leave early enough to meet Cofer up at the highway, and I wouldn't have to get wet. But I've gone to school a many a time, and I'd be so wet I'd go down in the basement and pull off those old black stockings and wring the water out and wash the mud off and put them back on and go on to class.
Now the road wasn't paved to Hartwell.
No, the roads wasn't paved. It's just good mud, good sticky mud. And it was that way everywhere then.
All right, at some time, though, didn't you board in Hartwell for high school?
Yeah, later, a lady that, she was a primary teacher at Sardis, told us we could, Evelyn Vassar and I, that we could stay with her from Monday till Friday. And we especially wanted to stay that spring because I was in lots of contests. And Ms. Allman was the supervisor of the contest, and she wanted me there after school. And that's one reason we stayed. And we'd carry our food or buy it. We usually carried enough from home to do us that week. And we stayed with her.
Now, did all the boys go to what level of school? It was unusual for you to go to high school, wasn't it?
Yes, there wasn't very many went to high school. Kofa Turner went, but and Kofa and I was the only two from my class at Sardis that went to high school. Everybody was through when they could learn to read and write.
Okay. When did your mother die?
My mother died my senior year in high school. On Monday morning, when I left home, she gave me the money for my high school ring. And I don't know how she got it, but she had it. And then when I finished college, Charles took my high school ring and had it made into a pin. And he gave me the ring, my college ring. And I had told, and she died on Friday afternoon. I never did see her after that Monday morning when we got home. And you see there, Jack was about 5 and a half, and he wasn't in school. And Arthur Peyton was in the first grade. And you see, Lucille was a mother to all of them. So Lucille told me if I would go on, and Daddy said I had to stop, and I knew I did too, because we had to work. And Lucille said no, she wanted me to go on and finish high school. And back then, when you finished high school, you could take the exam, and if you passed, you could be a teacher. And that's the way most of the teachers were then, was just high school graduates. So I went on back then to school and finished. And then I told Lucille that I would send Arthur and Peyton and Jack and Will Ed, I'd work and send them through school. And that's what I planned to do. Well, Will Ed went 2 weeks and he quit. He like to lost an arm. That back then they had to take so many shots, and he got it infected, and he just couldn't use his arm, and so he just quit school. And I guess it was a good thing, because he made more money than any of us after he just with his high school. But I did send Arthur and Peyton and Jack through college.
Arthur and Peyton twins?
They finished college, and Charles carried Arthur and Peyton to South Georgia. They went down there for 2 years and then transferred to the university and got their degrees from the university. Jack went to the university all his years, and he finished.
Had your mother been sick?
No, she died from childbirth.
Okay, and the name of that child?
And the child was never born.
Okay.
And
what was the name of the one who did die young?
John.
John.
We call him Little. I can remember Little John, because he was walking. Had diphtheria, and we all had diphtheria. I had diphtheria, and I remember the nurse that came. We had 2 nurses. They came from Anderson. And then after we got well enough, we had to go to Grandma Milford's and stay 7 days until they fumigated our house. And I don't know what they used, but anyway, we couldn't have anything brass in it. They took out the cook stove because whatever they burned in there must have killed the germs at that time. Yeah.
How old were you when you learned to drive?
I don't know. I guess I was about 15 or 14. And we went to Hotwell one day. And Joel wanted to do all the driving. Well, we carried Mother for something. And I wanted to drive home. And he wouldn't let me. And Mother said, yes, so now you stop and let her drive home. So he stopped and I got on the steering wheel. And I knew how to start. And when we got down to the house, I said, now how to stop? He said, I'm not going to tell you. And he wouldn't tell me, and I drove in the garage and knocked the back of the garage out, went down in the cotton field. But later I learned to back.
Backing up a little bit and talking about picking cotton, how much cotton could you pick?
One Saturday, when we were picking cotton, I was picking alone. They would leave me a field near the house, starting at the yard and going all the way around to Dooley's field over there. And it was just as white as snow. I can just see how it looked now. And I picked 350 pounds that Saturday by myself. But I picked every afternoon when I got home to try to make up. And I look back now and I think how wonderful it was of Lucille to let me go on to school. But they don't make them any better than Lucille was anyway. Because she lived for others.
Yeah. How old was your father when he died? I remember it, but I don't remember when it was.
I don't remember.
Okay. You remember when he was born? I mean, the year.
No, but I have that down in a record.
Okay.
But you see, my sister was 86 when she died. And Jack died first. He was the youngest. And he had a stroke on Sunday morning. And then Arthur died next. And then Peyton had a stroke. And then Joel. And he died just kind of like Milford. He just gave way. And then George, and then Willie. And so I'm the only member of my family now.
Tell me about going to the University of Georgia.
Well, I enjoyed the university, and I guess it's a good thing that I was as ignorant as I was, because everybody else was too. I felt like I knew as much. I started to tell you a while ago, this girl told me, said, if you didn't talk so much when I told them about the syrup, she said, people wouldn't know you were so poor. But I didn't know I was poor. I thought I was just as rich as in the rest of them. But I made good grades. I never had to repeat a class, but I didn't make A's by no means. But I passed, and there's just two of us passed physics, and I don't know how I passed, but I did, because I couldn't tell you anything about it now. But I loved all the professors. And I remember one morning, our science teacher put on the board, said, we're going to have a test this morning, and everybody's scared. And he wrote on the board, who flew the Atlantic on a ham sandwich? And I was the only one that knew. And what come me to know, Lindbergh was where I was living. The family upstairs had a bet that the food wouldn't fly the Atlantic. And about midnight, the other fella called him and told him he'd landed, so he lost. And he told me about Lindbergh was going to fly the Atlantic, and he did.
Where did you live when you were going to school, university?
I stayed in Sewell Hall 1 year, and then one of the professors of psychology, I can't think of his name right now, it'll come to me though, but he wanted somebody to stay and be with his two boys, one walking good and the other one about 3 years old, because he and his wife wanted to go out at night, and they would give me my room and breakfast and supper if I'd come and stay. And so I lived with them a year, probably 2 years. And because I remember once they were gone and the baby boy wanted an apple, and he just begged, and so I took an apple and peeled it and scraped it with a spoon and fed it. And then the next night he came and wanted the apple. And Miss, what was their name? I can't think. But anyway, their mother said, "Anna, did you feed them apple?" I said, "Yes, I did." And she just nearly had a fit. She says, she called her husband and said, "I guess you better take them to the doctor." Says they haven't ever had anything raw. And I told her that I had fed my brothers scraped apples, that I scraped a many one for them, and it didn't hurt them. Well, she just took on. She was afraid he was going to die from eating a scraped apple, but it helped him.
Let's see, when did you graduate from university? Do you remember the date?
I graduated in 19. You see, I dropped out 2 years.
What did you do when you dropped out?
Those 2 years, I felt like I owed so much. I never would get. You see, I borrowed every penny of my money. When I got ready to go to college, Daddy had no money, and he offered me the last $10 he had, and I wouldn't take it because I knew he needed it. And Charles carried me in my trunk over there, and I lived in the dormitory the freshman year. Well, my sophomore year, part of the year, that's when I lived. The Boyd is one I lived with, Dr. Boyd. They moved the girls that they could trust out in a little tenant house right next to the dormitory, and they put me in a little back room, and it was just big enough for me and my trunk. But they said, "Anna," said, "that's a good place, and you be by yourself." And said, they just told us they had to put the girls out there they could trust. And so that's where I lived that year. But those houses are all gone now. There's huge dormitories there. But I enjoyed dormitory life, and I worked in the kitchen and helped serve dinner. And lots of times, and we had chemistry over on the university side, and we didn't have but 10 minutes after class to get over there and get in our uniforms and get behind the counter to slang food. But we'd run. We'd run down the hill and up the hill and get in our uniforms and get behind that counter to throw food. And that's what we did.
Who'd you borrow the money from to go to school?
I borrowed my money from, Lucius McMullen went on my bonds. And I don't know who I have the receipt though now somewhere. I was the first girl to pay back the money that was borrowed that year. I had a letter from them that I was the first one that had ever paid back all I owed, because I paid it back before part of it the year I taught. And when I dropped out 2 years and taught at Sandy Cross, then I went back and finished up, because I wanted my degree and I wanted to do home demonstration work.
What did you do the 2 years you were out?
I taught home economics at Sandy Cross and science. And I'm telling you one thing, I learned more than I taught, because that was a wonderful community, and the people were just so nice to me. When I went there, everybody said, "You won't stay here long." Said, "They'll run you off." They ran the teacher off that was there before me. But the ones that they said that were so bad was my best friends. And I was invited in their homes. I'd go in their homes, and Colleen Powell and I was keeping house one summer. And they had summer school, so the children could pick cotton in the fall, see. And they would send us big old pieces of ham, sliced ham, to have for breakfast. And I wouldn't want to live in a community any nicer than they were to me.
Then you went back to the university.
And I went back to the university then and got my degree. And that's when I didn't know what I was going to do. I was waiting for them to assign me. And so they picked out 7 out of my big class for home demonstration work. And I was one of the 7. And I'll never will forget, one of the girls told me, she said, I don't see why you got it. She says, you don't have clothes enough to change every day. She said, I have 7 new suits and I can change every day. I said, well, I don't, but I said, I'm glad I got a place to go. And I didn't know where I was going. And they called me and told me to be ready. And they came and followed the call. Lady came in. I didn't know who the lady was, but she was a home demonstration agent. And she told me to follow her, and she carried me down to Greene County. And that's where I worked one summer. And then they notified me to be ready, that somebody was going to come by and pick me up for me to follow their car. And I was going to a new location. And I didn't know where I was going. But I got packed up and got my car ready and all. And when she came for me, I followed her. And we went to Athens, and from Athens we went to Commerce, and I still didn't know where I was going. And we landed in Conroe, and that's where I was going. The home demonstration agent there, they had asked her to resign. I don't know why, but it didn't make any difference because, and I love Franklin County.
And how long did you work in Franklin County?
3 years. Worked there until I married.
Well, how did you meet Daddy?
I met Daddy when I was in the 9th grade in high school. We were having a dance down at Mr. Skelton's down on the Savannah River. Back then, they took everything out of the living room and just had nothing in there. Everybody stood up around the wall and had room enough to dance. Well, I think Joel drove, I'm not sure. But anyway, I was with Ernest Edwards. I was going with him then. And Ernest and I and Lucille, and I don't know whether Albert was with Lucille or somebody else, and Joel, we all went. And Charles came up to me and wanted to dance. And I don't remember where we danced or not, but anyway, he wanted a date. And I told him, no, I had a date. Well, he wanted to come on Sunday. I said, no, I had a date on Sunday. And so he came anyway. And Ernest didn't like that. And so every time he'd ask for a date, I would have a date. But anyway, he just kept on. And he laughed lots of times and said if he had quit as many times as I said no, he never would have got a wife. But then I didn't promise to marry Charles until my senior year at the university. And and he knew I was paying off the debts, and he knew that I was to send Arthur and Peyton them through school too. And he's the one that carried Arthur and Peyton to South Georgia to get started into school. And he went for them some too.
Well, what was Daddy doing then? What was he doing for a living?
Daddy was running a filling station here at Newburgh.
Already he was doing that.
And it burned. Can you remember the one that burned?
I remember a fire. I don't remember if it was that one or not.
Yeah. Well, that's what he was doing. And then, of course, he had his mother and 2 sisters, too, to look after.
Now, where was he living?
They were living where Brown house burned that year. And then they moved over on the old home place. And
now, he was born in the house that Bodie's got, is that
yeah.
right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. And
but he didn't have a lot of money at that time either, did he?
no. Daddy said that he had promised God when his daddy he owed $3,000 when his daddy died, and for doctor bills, and said he promised God if he let him ever get out of debt, he'd never go in debt no more. And he didn't. He wouldn't buy anything on credit, and that was good too. And so he paid it up, and he had very little. And then he bought 1 acre of land here where the house is, and built, started this house. And it wasn't finished when we married. We didn't have any doors up. We went in and out the window for a month or two because we would buy the doors as we get the money. And then he built, we added to it in 1955, and added the front, and then later we added what I call the basement. And it's packed full of junk now, but I shouldn't have had it. But we had it. But Daddy didn't believe in going in debt, and he built Mother Hunt's house, and now Don owns it now. Luda willed it to Don. But Daddy took care of them all the time.
Where were you married?
We were married at Preacher Smith's home in Greenville on February the 19th.
Now, did Daddy have a car then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Daddy had a car when we were dating, and all the time. But
well, was he? Did he own?
we didn't announce our marriage. We were going to keep it a secret until the main reason was for me to try to collect. They owed me a year's salary from Franklin County, and then you had to take a note, and you had to get somebody to pay their taxes with that note before you'd get any money. And I didn't know how to do all that business. But anyway, we decided we'd keep it a secret till September, and we did. And then Mr. Vanderbilt, who was the governor, you know, at one time, he called me and told me he'd take my notes, and so he did, and he paid me, and then he turned around. He owned most of the land in Franklin County anyway, and I told you where we got married.
Yeah.
And then in September we announced our marriage, and Charles moved me from Carnesville here, and came up in a truck, and we had a truckload. I had all of my demonstration material to move, and at that time we carried a stove. I had a little kerosene heater with an oven and 2 burners that we demonstrated how to make bread and cook on, and can too on that. And of course he had built the house, and we had it partly furnished, and it wasn't finished, but we stayed here. And then a week or two after, in September, they were wanting somebody to be welfare director of Hart County, and that was 1933, the beginning of Roosevelt's administration. And so I took the test, and I was the only one that the state would approve that took the test, because I had courses in welfare work, and I wasn't planning to work, but it suited Charles all right for me to go ahead and take it, and so I took the welfare job. But Ms. Shepherd from Atlanta was our state director, and Talmadge was the governor, and he hated welfare work, and they were going to have a meeting and he had planned to get the state not to accept it. And when Miss Shepherd found out about it, she went in on the meeting and explained it to them, that we had people who needed help, and they needed work, and it was a work program, and the WPA they called it. And so I was appointed as welfare director, and at one time I had 18 aides helping me. And we covered Hart County, and every time they'd send out a project that had to be done and so much money, we had plenty of hands that we could call, and they'd go to it and get it done. And some counties didn't use their quota, but we always used our quota and let them know that we were ready for more. And I worked with it until for 3 years. And then when I left it, I went with, I had 10 counties work with the young people. And I go into these counties and organize groups and get them started and having regular meetings and teach them different games to play. And the CCC camp was one of the things that we'd send the boys to. And we always filled our quota. Lots of men today would have come to me and told me they were one of the CCC boys that went to camp. And at that time, that's the beginning of electricity in Hart County too. They came to me and wanted me to help work up people. They had to pay $5, and $5 was lots of money then. And with no hopes of getting it back unless we got electricity. If we got electricity, they would get that $5 back later. And Charles told me who to ask and who not to. He said there's some that's just a waste of time to talk to. But I got my quota. They gave me so many families, and I worked it up and got my quotas, and we were among the first to get electricity here.
So you went. Go ahead.
Huh?
You went from being welfare director of Hart County. And what was the next position?
The next one was with the YWA, the Young People's Organization. That I worked during Roosevelt's administration, and then I quit that. That's when Joe was born, and I went back to school then to change my license. They didn't have married women as home demonstration agents, only single women, and so I couldn't be a home demonstration agent any longer. So I went back and got my license changed for elementary education and started teaching. And then all along I had been working on my master's degree, and every time I'd like just a year, once I like 2 years, 2 courses getting it, and I let time elapse. Well, Charles wanted me to go back and get my master's and just go straight through. So I went back one summer and 2 winters and got my master's in education. And so I got a lifetime certificate then. And I'm glad now I did. But then there's very few that got a master's.
Now Daddy only went through about the 8th grade?
Daddy finished about the 6th grade.
6th grade.
He said when he went to school, he didn't know he was supposed to study. The main reason he went, he drove the wagon to Cousin Luther's girls. They all rode a wagon and went up the Bow Road, up there where that grove is. That's the old school building stood there. And he drove Cousin Luther's wagon, mules up there, and he would unhitch them and hitch them up for them and all for the girls to ride. But Daddy was a good reader, and in fact he knew more than I did.
Well, how did he get started with the service station? How did he get started with the service station?
Filling station?
Yeah.
I don't know how he got started, but anyway, he opened that up, and he got where he couldn't farm. He couldn't follow a plow. And so I remember when they farmed up in the Bio community. They lived up above the Thomas Hunt's home and had a big farm up there. And then Tom did the plowing, lots of it. Well, then Tom got married, and then Sing left for the Army. And so Charles couldn't farm anymore, so he opened up a filling station.
Well, was he was in the National Guard before y'all got married?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he stayed in it, and then I don't remember when he left the National Guard, but he believed in going to the training that they gave for young people. And he was a Mason, and he believed in his Mason's work too.
Okay. Well, when you got married, did he own the service station?
Yeah, he owned the little spot there.
Okay.
It was a small place,
Okay.
And then, as I said, he had 1 acre here. Then when the Normans that they live down where Albert Esty lives now, they sold Daddy some more land, and he bought, I guess there's about 15 acres in it. And then later he bought a place across the road too, and so there's at least an acre more that runs across the road, but it's all in one place now. And then I sold Charlie Ann and Wilbur where the store is, and the garden spot up here.
Mm-hmm. And when y'all got married, was just after the Depression?
Yeah, it was still Depression.
Still Depression?
Yeah.
So
money was scarce then.
So during the Depression, you were a home demonstration agent.
Mm-hmm.
And what did you do as a home demonstration agent?
I really enjoyed, when I look back over those years, I worked with a lady in Gwinnett County one summer before I got my degree, and we had 64 1- and 2-teacher schools in Gwinnett County. And we went into all those schools and organized 4-H clubs. And every club was followed it up after we left, after I left. And then when I came to Franklin County, I did the same thing. We demonstrated, back then we demonstrated how to can. They didn't have canneries like we have today in all the schools. We have to go into the homes, and we had sealers, and they canned in tin cans, and we'd sterilize the cans in the wash pots by boiling water and pack them full of food, and then seal them and cook them in wash pots. And of course today we would laugh about that method, but that's how we used it. And at that time we had a hailstorm through Franklin County, and the part of the county that wasn't hit gave the other county vegetables. And we'd go into those communities and can all day long for different people. We'd have a certain place to meet, and they would all cooperate with it. And then we demonstrated loaf bread. And back then we'd order our yeast by the pounds, and I made yeast bread one whole year and demonstrating it.
Well, was most of this you were doing, you talked about 4-H clubs, was most of it for school-age girls or for?
Yeah,
okay.
For school-age girls. And lots of times I meet up with a girl and I says, I remember when I was in your 4-H club, and she'd tell me what we did then. And so I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every bit of it. And we carried girls to camp in the summer. Now, they didn't have camps then like they have now. In Hart County, we would meet down in Rice's pasture and spend 2 days and 1 night. And our home demonstration agent would give demonstrations and talk to us. And we thought that was wonderful to get to go off and spend the night on the creek down in the pasture. And today they have wonderful camps for them to go to.
Well, how was life hard for you and Daddy in the Depression? How was life hard for you and Daddy in the Depression?
Well, we had enough. I had a job most all the time doing something, and we didn't spend any more than we had to. And Daddy always said, after Joe was born, and then Charlene, and then of course John, and he said, he's told me a many a time, he said, if we may not leave our children any money, but there's one thing I want to leave our children, and that's an education. He said they can't lose it, and nobody can take it away from them. And said that's two things I wished I had. And said I want us to do that. And so that's why we tried our best to give our children as good an education as we knew how at that time. Now, of course, if it's to do over again, I'd do quite different. I'd teach them at home a lot. Because I remember teaching when John finished the 2nd grade and was coming to me in the 3rd grade. He couldn't read. And the last week of school in the 2nd grade, they had a substitute teacher. And she was a good friend of mine. She was from Livonia. And she came to me and said, Anna, I want to tell you the truth. Your son is not ready for the 3rd grade. He cannot read. And I remember when I brought my books home after school, and school was closing that week, and John just couldn't read, and I'd cry. And John said, I can remember John crying too, because he couldn't learn to read. And I taught John to read and got him ready for the 3rd grade. And then I learned later, I had this teacher's daughter in my room, and she says, and I never taught them how to add. And I'd keep them in at recess and give their papers back that they had the day before and make them do it over. And they said, well, we did this last year and the teacher didn't keep us in. We did it all the year. But they soon learned they had to learn to add, or they would have no recess. And I brought that class up to date in adding and in reading. But
when growing up, I remember, one of the things I remember is all the pieces of cars we had out here. Back between here and what I guess is a garage, but we call it a barn now.
yeah, Daddy worked on cars.
Okay.
And he would fix cars and sell parts of cars. And it had the whole woods was covered up there. Where my garden is now was in cars. But he didn't make much. Most of it he just did it free. He worked on cars, and especially for the friends around here, and pump up tires. And of course, they don't do that no more, but they did then. But that was his sideline, and he was working on cars. And he worked in the gin a lot.
Well, tell me about the gin. How did we get into the cotton business?
The gin, he had bought an interest in the gin. And then later he bought the whole gin.
Was the gin here when you moved here?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that gin ran from the second week in August until Christmas. Every day gin and cotton. And this colored man, Jay Hunt, worked at the gin. And he lived over in the Hunt's home place. And he ran the engine. They thought nobody couldn't do that except Jay Hunt. And he was good at that. But I can remember cotton being packed everywhere. And they'd gin till midnight. And then sometimes they'd gin until they caught up, if it was all night long. They didn't have any cotton on the ground for the next morning.
At that time, most of it was still coming in by mule and wagon?
Yeah, everything mule and wagon. And sometimes you'd see a truck, but not often.
Okay. I also remember you used to sell Tupperware and encyclopedias.
Yeah.
Why did you start doing that?
Well, a lady came to me, and Joe had finished high school that year and wanted me to sell war books. And I told her I'd be glad to try. And so I got out and I talked it over with Charles, and he says, well, try your luck, and it's up to me. And so I made $1,000 that summer selling word books. And I said that was my college money. That was for the children to go to school on. And would tell everybody I was in school too. But everybody enjoyed those that I sold to. They come to me now thanking me. I had a lady the other day came to me and said, "You remember selling me the word books?" And I said, "I'm sorry, but I don't." She says, "Well, let me tell you what you told me." And she told me that I told her someday that my children would be so glad that they had the word books. And she says, "You know, that came true." She says, "We all enjoy them." Said, "I enjoy them now." And so I was glad to hear that. I enjoyed selling that, and I enjoyed selling Tupperware too. I sold Tupperware several summers, and they wanted me to be a full-time agent, but I didn't want to retire from teaching because I wanted to continue teaching, but I enjoyed both jobs.
Well, what do you remember about Joe growing up as your first child?
Joe was just as cute as he could be. Of course, I'd think that. But I remember when he started school, he started I was teaching that year at Nancy Hart. That's the only year I taught in Hart County. And I was teaching home ec. That's the last year that Hart County had home ec in their grade schools. They moved it to high schools after that year. And he had his first year there. And then when I was appointed to teach at Centerville, he transferred to Centerville and went through Centerville. And then when our building burned at Centerville, he liked a year of being through high school, so he finished in Elbert High School. And he made good grades. And I remember one day, he came home one day and says, "Mother, I can't go back to school until Daddy goes down and talks with the principal." I says, "Why?" He says, "Well, the teacher was out of the room and we cleaned off her desk." And said, the principal told me that Daddy would have to come down. Oh, I couldn't come back tomorrow. Said, "You go up there and tell him." I said, "No, you go yourself." And no, he wouldn't do it. And so I said, "Well, I'm not going." He says, "Mother, you'll have to." He said, "I'm not going to face my daddy. I'm not going to tell him what I did." And after we argued a while, I went on up there and told Daddy. And he came down here and changed clothes because he was dirty and greasy. He was working on a car. And he went on down there. And Joe didn't want to face his daddy. When he saw his daddy pull in, he struck out to keep the store then. And so when Daddy got back, I asked him what the principal said. He said he just wanted to know if I could cooperate with him. He said he showed me his record, and he said he was one of the smartest boys, and he could do anything he wanted to do, but get him to do it. He said they had a young teacher, and said when she went out of the room, they took the flowers off of the desk, and said that Joe told her that he dropped just one little flower down, and said he went all the way down just as easy and sat out on the ground and was looking right straight up. And said that's what he did. And said, "Teacher just wanted to know if I'd cooperate with him. But," says, "I want to show you this." Says, "Now, your mother, your wife, didn't sign this letter." And says, "We knew it, but we don't know who signed it." And they signed it Ms. Annie Hunt, and of course my name was Anna. And Joe and some more boys skipped the Fool's Day, what day, April the 1st, and they went out fishing out on the lake and spent the day. And Ms. Jones wrote the letter for him, Ms. Tom Jones, and she didn't know how to my signature, and he turned it in, but the teachers knew it wasn't mine because I had signed the report cards and they had. But Charles, he enjoyed talking with the principals and the teachers that afternoon. They were all waiting for him when he got there. And so, but he went on through school, and he came home one day and said, "Mother," said, "my type teacher told me if I'd make all A's next quarter, she wanted me to go with her to the Beta Club convention, and says I have to make all A's to go." And I said, "Well, you can do it." He said, "I know that I done made up my mind to do it." And he did, and he went with them. And I think that teacher, his typing teacher, was one that started him on the road. And then when he finished high school, he and a group of boys put in their application for, was it Douglas? Anyway, South Georgia.
In Douglas, South Georgia College.
South Georgia College. And they all came up here to spend the night with him. And I think there was either 6 or 7. And he just had an old piece of car. And of course they had their suitcases and all left here the next morning to go to college. And I told him that night before the boys got here, I said, "Now, if you go down there and make the honor roll, I'll give you a new car Christmas." And so when he came home Christmas, he said, "Have you received my grades?" And I said, "No, I hadn't." He says, "Well, I made the honor roll." And I told Daddy about it and told him what I had promised him. And he says, "Well, you're the one, go buy it." And I said, "No, you have to buy it." So we bought him a car so he could go back and finish. And I'm glad we did, because I worried about him being on the road in an old car at that time. But he enjoyed South Georgia, and he came to the university. And then from the university, he put in his application to go to medical school. And of course he went to medical school for 2 years and had a good average, and a B+ average when he stopped out. And I think if he hadn't got married, he would have finished as a doctor. But he got married and that didn't work. And then he dropped out. But he has done good. And he's happy in his work, and that's what I'm glad. And that he enjoys it.
I remember you telling me about one time when you had given him a bath, and then you were taking a bath. And you looked out the window and saw him.
One Sunday afternoon, Daddy always said, "After you rest a while, Mother," said, "come on up to the store and we'll go over to my people." Well, I gave John a bath, and
Joe.
Yeah, Joe a bath, and Joe had curly hair, and I curled it back up in the back, and he had a rooster comb, and I'd whirl that up, and it stayed curly all the time. And then I took a bath, and when I was taking a shower, I looked out the window, and he was halfway to Newburgh, right in the middle of the road, buck naked. I grabbed me a kimono, and I couldn't get it on. I was wet and soapy, and I got in the middle of the road, and I stayed in the middle of the road till I grabbed him up, and a car right behind me blowing, and I just let it blow till I got picked up Joe, and I popped him a time or two, but he was going to see his daddy. Mm-hmm.
And tell me about Charlie Ann growing up. Tell me about Charlie Ann growing up.
When Charlie Ann she was born premature. And she was born at Brown's Hospital.
In Hartwell?
In Royston.
Royston.
And it's where the Brown's new hospital is now. And it worried me because I didn't think she would ever see. And Dr. Brown said, yes, said she'll see when time comes. Said she's premature. And sure enough, in so many weeks, I've forgotten how many weeks it was, she opened her eyes. But I had been working with blind people in welfare work, and I just thought probably that she was blind to start with. And she was a tiny little thing. At that time I had back trouble and I couldn't lift her. I just have to roll her from the cradle over into on her table and bathe her and put her back. And but then when I started her to school when she was 5, they didn't have enough teachers. They're like one pupil having enough to keep an extra teacher, first grade teacher. And so they told me to start Charlie Ann. And because she would be 7 in February, she's supposed to be 6 in February, but she was February the 4th. And she was only 5. And she did good in school all the way through. She made all A's. And she made all A's through high school. And then I think one mistake I made, I wished I'd sent her to a junior college instead of to the University of Georgia. But she wanted to go to the university, and I never said no, because I wanted them, each one, to go where they wanted to go and do what they wanted to do. And so she went to the university. But she finished, and she enjoyed her work. And she enjoyed welfare work, working with children, and then she changed to teaching, and she's enjoyed teaching.
Okay.
And John started the school at Centerville, and when our school building burned, he went to Nancy Hart 1 year. And they didn't welcome him at Nancy Hart because they said that too many girls wanted to wink at him, and the boys was afraid that he was taking their girls away. So he had a fight with one of the boys, and the principal told him he couldn't go to the library anymore. So I told him that I'd check him out some books from the Hartwell Library and bring. He could have plenty to read at home. And I did, and he finished there and then went on to Hartwell. But when he was in Hartwell, he worked at the radio station in the afternoons until closing time. And that was a great help to him. And then when he finished high school, he put in his application and was accepted at Young Harris. But he'd have to take English over. And so Dad and I carried him up there. And Daddy knew one of the teachers. She was from Hartwell, had originally lived in Hartwell. And so she told Daddy not to worry about it because she'd see that he got along all right. Well, anyway, he took the exam, and instead of staying in the freshman English class, they put him in the sophomore class. So he made enough to go up in the sophomore. So he finished his first 2 years up there and enjoyed it, and then was transferred to the university. And that's when Daddy died, when he was at the university. He wanted to come home and stay with me, and I told him no, that I had lived my life, and I wanted him to stay over there so he could study. But he worked his way through. He wouldn't let me pay for his tuition. He said, "Mother, you don't know when I've got to work, so I'll have a job when I get through." Well, I thought if I could pay his tuition, he'd get through quicker. But he knew more than I did, because the day that he graduated, he came out and picked me up and said, "Mother, I got a job today." Said, and they pay more, and told me how much they were paying. And I said, "Well, you're not going to leave the radio station, are you?" He said, I'm going to put in my resignation. I'm going with the newspaper." And I couldn't hardly believe it, that I thought he would work with the radio station the rest of his life. But he said they're going with Banner Herald. And so he went with Banner Herald. and he's been with the newspaper ever since. But John is a happy person, and he can meet anybody. I remember Joe telling him one day, I don't see how you can walk up on the stage and introduce people. Said, I couldn't do that. And John said, I don't see how you can fly a plane either, because I can't do that.
Well, what else can you think to tell me about?
Well, I can say the one thing. When I look back over my life, I've had a good life. And Daddy and I were happy. And we had plenty. We never suffered for anything. And his main interest was he wanted me to take care of myself, and he wanted the children to have good health. And he had insurance on them, but I don't. So if anything happened, and we would always have something to fall back on, we could give them a barrel at least. But his main thought was he wanted them with a good education. And when I look back, they all three happy. They have good jobs. They have a good family. And Charlene, of course, doesn't have children, but she has stepchildren. And she has 6 granddaughters, and they take up lots of her time. And she's happy with them and Wilbur. And John's family is just as happy as they can be. Cameron is smart, but he's not as smart as Cassidy. Cassidy is just 4, and she is really something else. This Christmas she is just as happy as she can be, and she knows so much more. Now young people today, they have a wonderful opportunity that I never had and that my children never had, because the world is changing so. And Joe is happy. This is his, he's living with his 3rd wife, but he seems to be happy, and I'm glad. And I've kept in touch with Sylvia and Cliff, and they are happy in their work. They have good jobs. And Sylvia finished college, and she's head of the computer system where she works, and she is on a good payroll. And I'm happy. And Clifford, well, he's still studying. I sent him to college 2 years. I helped him some, and I thought probably Marlene would finish the other 2 years, but she got her master's instead, and he is still going to school, taking one course at a time, and he'll finish in this coming May in 1992, and as a clerk reporter, and he'll enjoy that. He enjoys newspaper work, and that's what he's doing now. When he left Chicago to go to California, when he came back the first year and went back where he worked, they gave him lots of tapes to study, and that helped him a lot with the work that he's doing now.
I'm not going to show this tape to Charlie Ann for a long time. Tell me about your bingo games.
Bingo. I try to go to Senior Citizen twice a week. I go on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But now, since I can't drive very good, I try to go every second Tuesday is when we play bingo. The Kiwanis Club in Howell gives gifts, prizes for, and sponsors the bingo. And they bring anywhere from 10 to 15 gifts every Tuesday morning. And everybody plays bingo. And we have a good time. And when the gifts is out, well, it's over with for that day. And some of the gifts is nice gifts, and some is not so expensive, but they each one average $10. they pay over $100 for the gifts. And we enjoy seeing them come in. They are happy. They are men who are retired and working for the community. Some of the things that they do to earn this money is selling cans. And so I pick up cans here, and I've carried several bags full. The drink cans, Coca-Cola and so forth. And one man sold $500 worth last year, and he gave that to the senior citizen. And we're going in a new building in a week or two. The building's all ready now, and we're waiting for the ground to get packed down and more gravel put on for parking space before we go in. But I enjoy senior citizen. Of course, it's a mixed group. It's colored and white together. But I've always worked with the colored people. We have lots of colored people in this community, and they'd do anything for me. And I had a man walk up to me in the grocery store and asked me yesterday, "Aren't you with Miss Charlie Hunt?" And I told him yes. And then he began to tell me how much he thought of Daddy. And he said, "I knew that was you." And so I feel like I can call on them when I need them for anything in the community.
I remember that a lot of the black people used to call Daddy Captain.
Yeah.
Is there any particular reason?
No, Daddy, I reckon he was kind of the leader in this community. And they called him the mayor of Newburgh a lot, too. And the colored people would call him Captain Hunt. But Daddy would loan them money. And, of course, you might say gave them money, because that's how it ended up. But I had them to come to my bedroom window lots of nights and knock. And Charles said, "Who is it?" And they'd tell. "And what do you want?" They want to borrow 50 cents. And "What do you want for it?" And they'd tell what they wanted. They just had to have the money. And so he'd get up and let them have money. And he'd get up and go let them have gas any time of night that they wanted gas. And because I didn't, but I can say this, the only people I collected from was the colored people when Daddy died. I had 2 boxes stacked full of bills where the people owed Daddy, but they never paid. And some of them, I talked with the sheriff about it, and he told me, he said, "You lose more than you gain to try to collect, and this you have to forget it." And I know a lot of times somebody in the community would die, and Daddy said, "Well, I burned what he owed me. I burned the bills this morning, because you can't get blood out of a turnip."
You remember what Daddy used to say about funerals?
Daddy said he ought to go to funerals. Said everybody ought to pay respect for the dead. And Daddy would always come home and change clothes in a hurry and go to the funeral, because he said you owed that to the dead. And I reckon Daddy loved everybody. Well, there's lots of people that he didn't love as much as others, you might say, because but he got along with everybody and had lots of friends.
He kept a safe in the back of the store. He kept a safe in the back of the store.
Yeah, he kept a safe in the back of the store. And one day I went up there, and the money box was sitting out. And I said, "Daddy, did you leave this out?" He said, "No, I forgot it." And it was empty. He looked right funny. And later he told me that somebody had taken it out and had taken the money. And they also took the notes. He had some notes where he had loaned money. And he told me who he had loaned it to. And he says, when he comes to pay, I'm going to tell him what happened. And he did. And when the man came and paid up $200 or $300, he told him that he didn't have his note, that he would destroy it. But he had already gone.
And he kept a lot of pistols in that. I guess people had pawned him pistols for money.
Yeah. And when Daddy died, his guns got gone that day, the next. We never did know who got them. Of course, we had a good idea, the ones that kept the store. They took all of the antique guns he had. But when I look back, I done the best I could do with it. You ready?
Yeah.
Since Daddy's death, and now that's been 21 years ago, and I wanted to quit teaching, but I just couldn't. And John wanted to stay at home with me, but I told her no, I wanted him to go back and finish school, and he did. And Charlene was here, and she was teaching in Everett County. Well, then she got married the next year, so I've been here by myself since then. And I'm so thankful for my health. I've had good health up until last summer. Last summer on June the 17th, I had a sunstroke in the garden, and I fell backwards. And it's not like just falling down, I was just knocked down. And I was stiff as a board, I couldn't get up. And after so long I could get up, I couldn't move my knees, and I had a hole with me. And then when I stood up, I fell the second time. And after so long, it was about 7:30 in the morning, I had picked a big basket of beans. They were so pretty and just right to can. And then when I decided I left everything but come to the house. And when I got nearly to the house, I fell forward over a bridge, and I pulled my big toe and my fourth toe straight up and twisted it on the planks over the bridge, and I thought my foot was broken. It was throbbing so before I got to the house. So I came on and pulled myself in the kitchen door, and I thought I'd go sit on the front porch in the rocker, and I started out the door and I fell backwards, and that's when I hurt my back, and I cracked 2 ribs. And then I couldn't move forward and I couldn't move backwards because my ribs hurt so bad and my foot was throbbing so. And about 11:30, I called Charlene. I didn't want her to know it, but I had to. I called her and told her what happened. So she came on up here. So after I went to the doctor, he said, well, your foot's broken. But when he x-rayed, he said, no, the muscles were twisted. And so he gave me something for that. And I had already put a band, I had a rib band to put on, and I had already put it on. And then that was the end of my garden. For 2 months I couldn't walk. So I sat here most of the time. And then I got where I could stand and walk. And I still don't walk straight because my knees, the doctor said it's arthritis in my knees and ankles. And when my ankles pop, or if I don't have something to grab to, I fall. But my house is so compact, I always have something to grab to in the house. But when I'm outdoors, I take a walking stick. But I'm glad I can get along as well as I can. And I draw my teacher's retirement and also Social Security. And I've had plenty to live on and enjoy my neighbors. And I enjoy going to church.
I also remember, when did y'all start acquiring animals here? Did you had cows and pigs here and chickens?
And when we married, my daddy gave me a young cow. And we had a pasture out at the back. And then the welfare worker came wanting me to be a welfare director. Well, Charles sent the cow back to my daddy, gave it back to her because I couldn't take care of a cow if I was going to work. Because then you didn't get home at a regular time. You got home whenever you could. And but I always had chickens, plenty of chickens, and I enjoyed my chickens. Back then you could raise chickens, but anyway, the possums and raccoons and all would get after your chickens at the back. But we enjoyed having them.
And you had 2 pigs at one time, ham and gravy? Is that
Yeah,
right?
we had 2 pigs, ham, and one named Ham, one gravy. And then when in July, they were half grown or over half, the well went dry. And Daddy had to haul water. He said he wasn't hauling water for no hog, so he sold them. And I remember when he sold them, because we thought about all that ham and gravy was gone for good. But one year we had a hog, and several years we had a hog, and we killed it, and grind the sausage, cured the meat, and we enjoyed every bit of it. And we always had kittens and cats and a dog. I love dogs. I'd have a dog now if it wasn't so near the highway. But the last dog I had, John brought me one. I named him Prince. Oh, he was so pretty, black, just as black as he could be, and smart. And he listened to everything I'd tell him. But he got in the road and got killed. We had Pug when Daddy died, a little dog, and it's hard to think about how much a dog knows. Pug would come and sit on the back steps and listen for Daddy to come home, and then he'd knock on the door, and when I'd open the door, he'd go into Daddy's bed and stand up and look in the bed to see if Daddy was in there, and he'd come right back out and sit on the steps waiting for him to come home. I remember very well when Pug died. John was here, and we buried him up in the garden.
Tell me about the early days at Bow. Tell me about the early days at Bow, when y'all were going to Bow.
I didn't understand.
Tell me about the earlier days at Bow, when y'all were going to Bow.
Child was already a member at Bow, and then I put my membership in at Bow, and I enjoyed Sunday school because they wanted me as a teacher, and I taught the juniors for a long time. Then I taught the intermediates, and then when my children were little, I went into the adult class and let somebody else take over teaching. I always carried my children to church, even carried them on a pillow when they were little, and they enjoyed Sunday school in church, and we have Bible school every summer. And when my children were coming up, we had lots of young people at Bow. We don't have very many now because the ones who own the homes are grandparents mostly. And so we don't have very many children to come to Bow. But they enjoyed, and I always enjoyed having the preacher to come home with me. I remember one time I invited them, and I didn't have anything cooked for dinner except beans and cornbread. And so when I told them, when I invited them, I said, I don't have anything but beans and cornbread. And Miss Smith said, that's more than we have at home, said we don't have a thing, and I'll have to go home and cook. I said, well, you come on, go with me. I got a big pot of beans and cornbread. And so I came on by the filling station and told Daddy, and he says, well, and he had just bought some cantaloupes. So he got up 4 or 5 cantaloupes and came on down to the house, and he fixed the cantaloupes while I fixed the dinner on the table, and Mr. and Miss Smith and their 4 children. And we had a worker that came from Atlanta, and she came too. And I had tea made, and that's what we had for lunch. But that was better than her going back to Sardis and having to cook dinner. And I always enjoyed having them.
You were telling me yesterday about this man coming to tell Daddy about you going off with some men. You were telling me yesterday about this Mr. Robertson telling Daddy about you going off with some men.
Yeah.
Tell me about that again.
When I was welfare director, we tried to get improvements in every school in Hart County, and so we would build a new auditorium and add classrooms to the building too. That's through the WPA work, and they had a quota, and every time we'd get a quota, we'd try to fill ours just as quick as we could. So if there's any money left over, the state would give us some extra money. And so one morning, a group of about 5 or 6 men, the trustees of different schools, we were going to Atlanta to meet with the board. And so I met them in Hartwell about good daylight, and we left out for Atlanta. Well, one of the neighbors was in Hartwell, and he came down here and he told Charles, said, "Charles, I saw your wife get in the car this morning with 5 or 6 men," and said it was just a little after good daylight. And Charles said, "You know you didn't." He said, "Yes, I did." Says, "I know." Said, he told her where I parked, and says, "Her car's up there now. She didn't go in her car. She got in the car with some men and left." And Charles said, of course Charles knew where I'd gone, you know. But he said, "Well, I just don't see how she'd do anything like that." And he just took on about it. He never did tell the man that he knew where I was gone. But I had gone to Atlanta I was the welfare director, and I had to sign all the papers for the schools. And so that we wanted to be first because they just give us certain time to be there. But I enjoyed welfare work. I remember one time when I was welfare director, the program changed. Sometimes it changed 2 and 3 times a day, and I'd get a telegram telling me what to do. And probably in an hour or 2, I'd get another one changing that. Well, one morning I got a telegram that they not to take the payroll out, get somebody with a gun to go with me. And my payroll was $3,000, and it was in envelopes. And said, "You can't go by yourself." Well, I got in my car and came home and told Charles. So Charles locked up the store, filling station, and got his pistol and went with me. And we went back and got the money, and I carried it down on what we called it, John Richardson's swamp. That's where they were working that day. And then I would stand on the running board of the car and call out the names and pass the money out. We paid them in the field where they were working at the end of the day. But I wasn't scared, and I never did have any trouble with any of them. And sometimes I'd tell Charles I was scared to stay here at night when he'd go somewhere, and he'd look me in the face and say, "Anna, you're not scared of the devil, and you know it." But I was. I remember one time, I love those men. They were hard workers, and they had very little to live on. And we had one man, Mr. Sudsberry, I remember his name, and lots of people thought he was half crazy, but he wasn't. He had plenty of sense. But one day I visited his home, and he said, "Miss Hunt, come in here and look in my back room." And I went in the house with him, and he had 4 or 5 sacks of flour. He said, "That's what I do with my money." He said, when this program's over, I'm going to have bread. And so that showed he had good sense.
Looking back to living at the old home place,
Mm-hmm.
what are the best memories you have of that time?
I guess my best memories of the home place is when we were all there, and when Mother was living. And there's so much that you can think about. But Mother loved every one of us, and she did so much for us. I feel like it was her prayers. The reason I'm here today. And my daddy was good too. But Lucille was so good. She was good to everybody. And Albert was to her husband. Albert was an offering. He was given away. He was a West, and a Mr. Cheek adopted him when he was about 2.5 years old or 2 years old. He can remember when he was adopted. And but he was a true Christian. If he ever was a true Christian, he was one of them. And Daddy had his set ways to do things. He wanted a plow set a certain way, and I can look back now and see why, because he was taught that. But you see, if there was a better way, you had to do his way to please him. And Albert was a person that could please him. He displeased him. But now, Milford wouldn't please him. Lots of times Milford knew better. He knew how to do things better because he had finished college and he knew how to do things, and he'd try to tell Daddy. But Daddy couldn't understand it that way, and I can see why Daddy couldn't understand it. He wanted his way because it had worked before. But the changes really come and go. Dad.
Do you remember the first television in Newburgh? Do you remember the first television in Newburgh?
The first television in Newburgh that I saw was at Dr. Harper's. Daddy wanted us to go up there and said that he had a TV. And we went up there that night and watched it, and I just couldn't hardly believe what I was seeing. And I don't know, it wasn't very long after that until we got one. And but we enjoyed it. And I remember when we got our first Victrola. I guess I was about 12, and Daddy bought us the Victrola and the records, and we just thought that was the most wonderful thing in the world. And we had little old Ford Rambles Right Along was one of them, and the different ones. It's still in the basement. You know, I gave it to you, and this and that. And some of the records over there under the Victrola now, I mean the TV. And we enjoyed that, and then we never had a phone, and we didn't have a phone here until, I believe it was 55, we got our first phone. It was after we got electricity and all, because we got electricity before that, but I didn't own a phone. I didn't need one, didn't think.
Well, after you got the Victrola, sometime your family got a radio?
I don't remember when we got the radio, but we did later on, the radio.
Okay.
But we took the newspaper, and that's one thing, didn't many people take a newspaper. And when I was in high school, we just had one little farm magazine, and I'd look forward. It came on Friday, and I'd go to the mailbox and get that on Friday, and I nearly memorized that because I loved to read it, and had lots of poems in it. And then later Daddy took the newspaper. He took the newspaper in World War I, and I remember the neighbors, Cousin Booth, Temples, and Mr. Adams, and Mr. Adams had 2 sons that had to leave for the war. They'd come over to the house and sit on the porch, and Mother would read the war news to them that would come out in the paper. And I remember Mr. Adams said he didn't guess he'd ever see his boys anymore because they were across the sea. And I don't remember whether they came back or not, because we did lose lots of boys.
Do you remember the announcement of Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
Do you remember where you were?
No, I don't remember where I was, but I remember when Kennedy was killed. I was here, And on Sunday morning, about 10 o'clock, it's about 1, between 12 and 1, I walked in and turned TV on, and that's when Oswald was shot. And I was looking at TV when he was shot and how he fell over. I remember the stories that came out then. And I remember when the Lindbergh's child was kidnapped, I was teaching at Sandy Cross, and I had some boys by that name, Holloman's, and I remember when that, how that came out.
What about Victory in Europe Day or VJ Day? The end of World War II?
Yeah, I remember that, and I had a teacher that told us about it. And one thing I remember too, because he had half of his arm shot off, and he told us about how happy he was to get home that day, just with the bone and a little skin over it. And I remember when, of course, when Joe left, and Joe joined the Navy in 57, 55, wasn't it? I don't remember the date, but anyway, he was going to be drafted, and so he went back to the university. He liked one course getting his degree when he entered medical college, and so he went back and took that. He took the exam and passed, and they gave him his degree, and then he was going to be drafted from Hartwell, so he volunteered, so his National Guard work would count, and he left.